Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining my session. The title of my session involves 6 tips for fostering deep learning in person and online. And I'm going to be talking about 6 tips for incorporating a variety of different question types in order to accomplish this objective. And I will be referring to the iClicker that I use in all of my courses now, and how I can use these different question types with the iClicker system. Most of us, all of us, pivoted online during the pandemic, and a large majority of us will still be doing classes online, and we'll also be conducting classes face-to-face and a combination of the two. I love iClicker because of its versatility, and in this situation, I can use iClicker with my online students, and I can also use iClicker with my hybrid face-to-face classes. So right now, I'm talking about having students home or wherever, and I'm having students in the classroom. I use iClicker to make sure all students are in the same headspace no matter where they are physically, and this helps everyone with our connections. We're at the same place and at the same time mentally and psychologically. The first step of the 6 tips, the first tip or the first step is obviously attendance. Students have to be made accountable for 1, attending class, and 2, for staying focused while they are in class. Now, let's be honest, we know when we have Teams or Zoom faculty meetings or whatever, let me just check my email for a second, or I've had some colleagues tell me they actually run and put in a load of laundry while the meeting is going on. So we understand personally how easy it is to become distracted when we are in an online environment. It's very serious when students become distracted because they are not focusing and paying attention. And if you are in psychology, we do know that attention is the #1 resource of the cognitive system, and it's in very short supply. So how do we get kids to attend class, and how do we get students to remain focused? I use iClicker to achieve both of these objectives. Now, how do we make sure students stay focused? The iClicker focus feature, which you can use or choose not to use from the instructor perspective, actually measures and keeps track of how many times students leave the iClicker app. It doesn't tell us where they go. It just tells us that they are no longer in the iClicker app, so they're no longer seeing your slides and they're no longer focused on that information. Not only do I get this focus report, but students also get the focus report. And I've had students tell me that they didn't realize how much time they actually spent when they're online away from the class instruction because they can still hear us. So they really think they're paying attention, they think they're focused, but this focus feature that iClicker provides lets us know, and it holds students accountable for being where they should be when they should be there. The second tip for connecting students with various question types is for you to start class with a question. And the question that you start class with should be a question that helps students activate and or retrieve previous knowledge, or knowledge that we covered at the end of the most recent class. So that question goes up and students' mind immediately become activated, hopefully, and we can use the answers to that question as a springboard to the current lecture class. These questions can be asked verbally. They can answer and hold their hands up. And at the beginning of any class, we do know that students are reticent to hold their hands up. So iClicker actually greases the wheel, as it were, and gets students in the mode of answering. So what are the different types of questions that I can use with the iClicker system? I'm not restricted actually on any of the question types I would normally ask in a face-to-face situation. I can ask short answer questions, multiple choice, multiple answer questions where there's more than one right answer, a numeric question where they actually have to put in a date or do some type of mathematical calculation. I can ask a target question. For example, I can put up a picture of the brain and ask the question, where is the language center located? Or what would a stroke which section of the brain would a stroke most likely have occurred if it impacts language? That's a target question. And very useful is the exit poll. I can find out the muddiest point in my lecture, for example, for each individual student, or I can ask a question that they can answer for me that will hopefully summarize everything that we've covered in class in that particular lecture period. Okay, this is a short answer opening question. This is an example of that. In one word, and obviously I've gone over this information in a previous class quite thoroughly, I might add. In one word, what is the difference between negative reinforcement and punishment? We have a simulated iClicker session here with simulated students, and we have 1 response in, 2 responses, 3 responses, 5 responses. So let's close the clock. And at this point in time, once I shut off iClicker, any responses that students give are not recorded. So obviously you want to warn students that you're shutting down. So let's see what my students tell me about the difference between negative reinforcement and punishment. Okay, I have increased, not sure, decreased, nothing. Nothing. So let's go word cloud. Let's see what the most dominant. The most dominant response is increase. And then we have decrease, and then I'm not sure. So the right answer is, when we go back to that slide, what is the difference between negative reinforcement and punishment? The right answer is negative reinforcers increase response rate, while punishment decreases response rate. So the students who did increase are right, and I can grade that answer right there. You can see that on your screen. I graded that answer, and that was the right answer, and that goes into the student's grade book that they correctly answered that question. So that is how I'm going to get a class started, with them retrieving information from a previous class session. And we know from a lot of extensive trial and error and research, asking questions every 7 to 10 minutes really resets the student attention clock and keeps them on target. And so I tried to ask iClicker questions every 7 to 10 minutes, and I use questions that require content chunking. Now, let's go back to how we can get students engaged, involved, and focused. My iClicker points are class participation points, and I give 10% of my final grade for class participation. And this motivates students to show up, that's their class participation, and it motivates them to pay attention. It also motivates them to read ahead of time because a large number of my questions require a right answer if they want to get credit, although I do opinion questions. Next slide, please. Now, this is an example of a numeric question. In what year was the first psychology lab established? So let's see how smart the students are in this particular class session. I chose the numeric question type, and that automatically configures all the students' devices, whether they're on their phone, their tablet, their computers. It automatically configures the question so they can answer appropriately. So we've got 5 responses. We're going to stop the clock. No new responses can come in at this point. And so what year was the first laboratory, what was the first psychology lab? What was the question? What year was the first psychology lab established? Yes. And the answer is 1879 is 1980. 1879 is the correct answer. Now, when students say, but wasn't it when William James published his first book? Isn't that considered the official start time of psychology? And I can say, no, that's not what I asked. I didn't ask when psychology first started. I asked when was the first laboratory in psychology established, and psychology history buffs know that was in 1879 by Wilhelm Wundt in Leipzig, Germany. So you see, I can ask very directed questions, or I can ask open-ended questions. Who, what, where, when, how. And I can combine these questions to hopefully generate a basis for students to be connected and to engage students in discussion. So even when I ask questions and I put up the histogram so students can see how not only they answered, but how their classmates answered, we want to discuss the results. We always want to discuss our iClicker questions so that students can get a deep understanding of why the correct answer is the correct answer. And we can use these questions as anchors for small group breakouts, whether online or face-to-face, because depending on your LMS system, and we use Blackboard at the University of Louisville, I can, and collaborate, I can break students down into small groups, or with teams, I can break them down into small groups, and they can discuss their responses and come up with a reason why they chose what they chose, and then present that to the entire class. Now, this is a topic that we covered in introductory psychology, and by the way, I teach psychology classes, including introductory psychology, and the power of scientific thinking. And then under that heading, I give a lecture on pseudoscience. And pseudoscience obviously means fake science, even though those who use pseudoscience depend on the power of scientific thinking and the power of science and the power that holds over the thinking of the consumer to sort of blind them to the fact that they're using a pseudoscience strategy. And we see the strategies here, and I show a video in my class of a commercial, a very popular commercial. And the video is only about 30 seconds, and I can use iClicker with that video. And I ask in my class, what strategy did the video convey to you? What the question is, what pseudoscience strategy is the most evident or implied in this particular commercial? And I have my responses here from my very, very smart classroom of people that I have with me. And we have 3 responses. So let's just stop with the 3. And what do the students say? Okay, I have 1A, and that is testimonials rather than scientific evidence. And then I have a D and E, confirmation bias and shifting the burden of proof. Now, why is it important? You say, well, you could just ask that question without using iClicker. We have found in psychology that when students commit to an answer, they have more skin in the game, as it were. That means that they are more likely to try to justify the answer they have committed to, and we can work with that in our small group discussions and in my discussions of the responses. Now, the correct answer is A for this particular video, and I can definitely go into discussion because students are going to justify the answer before I give them the correct answer. And then I can also show the video again to explain to them and illustrate why A is the most appropriate answer for that question. So even though this is a multiple choice A, B, C, D answer, there's a lot of discussion that's generated, and there is a lot of ways that students can delve deeply into their logic and their reasoning and correct any type of errors that they may have had about this topic. I've just shown you how I use videos and how I use iClicker with videos, which gets beyond the static text-heavy PowerPoint presentations that a lot of students and faculty complain about. So strategy number 6 is to ask closing questions at the end of your class period. And these questions can, once again, be asked so that students will have to synthesize the material that you've presented in this class period, or you can create an exit poll for students to respond to at any point in time before the next class session. The exit poll is created so that students can give you, as far as they're concerned, the most confusing point in the lecture, which is also those of you who are familiar with assessments, is called the muddiest point. And so iClicker automatically creates the exit poll, and students can give you their understanding from 1 to 5, and they can also explain what they found confusing. The exit poll identifies gaps in student understanding, and it helps direct my instruction for the next class period. Actually, it becomes a just-in-time teaching technique where I can say, I found out from the exit poll that there was a lot of confusion about negative reinforcement and punishment, for example. And so I can go over that once again, and I've had spontaneous emails from students saying they really like being able to let me know in this format what they found confusing, because they would have been intimidated in a classroom, especially in a face-to-face environment, to raise their hand and say, I don't understand this. And in an online environment, same thing. They don't want to unmute their mic and have everyone's attention focused on them when they say, I don't understand. This gives us the way to address misunderstandings and to make our lectures and the questions we ask far more meaningful. One of the things that students tell me that they love about my classes is that all of my iClicker questions are automatically iClicker automatically creates a study tool for all the questions that I ask. And in the student app, they could have the questions, they can test each other. I've had students tell me that they create groups where they test each other on the answers and they make sure they know the answers. So in order to connect students with each other, this helps them in their study sessions and in their study groups. And I've also found that they really appreciate, because they are focusing on the questions that I ask. They appreciate when I show a version of that question on a formal assessment on a test. It doesn't have to be the same question, but it does have to be, I believe, something that you've emphasized and covered in class, something very similar. And that was an example of what the iClicker study tool looks like. Every question that I've asked is automatically captured and converted to either a flashcard format, depending what students want, or a quiz format. Thank you for your time, and I'm open at this point for any questions that you may have.